All right, class. So, our next video will cover Learning Objective 1.4, which is describe the major types of research methods and their major drawbacks. Please be mindful that I have broken this huge learning objective into two videos. So, we're first going to cover descriptive research methods. Now, it's really important to understand that descriptive research is a type of investigation used to describe and explore a phenomenon. You'll find that it's especially useful when people within the field are trying to study new topics or really evaluate unexplored areas of a subject. Now, you'll find that descriptive research methods includes naturalistic observations, case studies, and a survey. You'll also find that correlational studies are a part of descriptive research as well. Now, if you remember the information presented in Learning Objective 1.3 video, we spoke of predictive hypotheses. Remember that a predictive hypothesis is an educated guess about the relationships among variables. So, the different research methods that we'll talk about or learn in this video will be very appropriate to test a predictive hypothesis. So, let's start with the first research method, which is a naturalistic observation. Now, a naturalistic observation is when researchers and their team observe an individual within their natural setting without influencing or controlling the dynamics within that environment. You'll find that the research team is going to record the behavior. So it provides a lot of raw data for the team. Again, you have the research team just observing the patient or the subject in their environment. Now, there are so many drawbacks to this, but you'll find that this research method is helpful. One particular drawback that you need to write down is called reactivity. So, when a subject is aware that someone is watching them and documenting their behavior, you will find that the individual will change their behavior. So, to combat that, you'll find that the team will have to just stay put in the environment, be there until the subject or the patient starts to return to their baseline behavior, secondary to becoming a little bit less apprehensive about someone watching them. Another major drawback is observer bias. So, a lot of people cite the fact that with a naturalistic observation, so many of the researchers are documenting behaviors based upon their interpretations or based upon their expectations. So it's kind of like you're seeing what you want to see. And so therefore you're documenting that behavior, which that could be overrode by someone having a really good, clean definition of the target behavior. Another major drawback for this research method is the fact that you just have to wait on the subjects to perform the behavior, and you aren't able to manipulate anything to kind of prompt the behavior to come. So I would imagine just sitting there watching someone for hours and the patient or subject not performing the behavior would start to become a little bit boring. Another drawback for this particular research method is the fact that it does not provide cause and effect, which we are fully aware because this is not an experiment, right? But a naturalistic observation is something that could be quite helpful for individuals. Our next research method of discussion is a case study. So, a case study is quite interesting to me because it's going to provide information about a subject or an issue that's not really heavily researched. It's almost something new or budding in the field. And so, to me, I find that interesting. Now, a case study could be conducted on a single person or a small number of individuals who share some form of an issue or some form of a condition. Now, a research team would come in and conduct this very in depth study of a person, meaning they're going to conduct all types of observation on the subject. You will find that they will perform several interviews on the individual as well as peers, family members, and etc. You'll also find that there may be psychological testing as well as medical assessments being taken place. They're doing all of this to see if they can find some form of commonality between the individuals, the people who are suffering from that said issue. Now, looking at it from that perspective, a case study can provide some pretty good information. However, we have to be aware of the limitations to it. One of the major limitations to a case study is that you just can't generalize the information. You'll find that there may be 7 out of 10 people that had a common experience. However, 3 of the 10 did not, which makes it very difficult for one to generalize that information to a larger group of people. You'll also find that another drawback to a case study is observer bias. Again, people or researchers may see what they want to see. They have this perception and they're going to just portray it on this individual. In fact, if you've ever watched the movie Sybil or you've read the books that portrayed Sybil, some people cite the fact that her psychologist shaped her to display symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, which we called multiple personality disorder. That's the old lay term for it. And so observer bias plays a huge role in how we very much document behaviors. Again, we can clean that up with having a very good, clean definition of the target behavior so we can clearly identify what we're seeing. Another major limitation to this is the fact that the team can establish a cause of the behavior. You just have the facts presented to you. You don't have a rationale for it. So that could be deemed a drawback. Our next particular study is a research method called a survey. So we all have experienced some form of request to complete a survey. And if you're like me, you're wondering, well, why are you choosing me? Is it some form of randomness that's going on? But if there is a 15 to 20% discount, I will spend the additional time to complete the survey. But I digress. Let's talk about what exactly is a survey. So a survey could be presented in the form of an interview or a questionnaire. but you will find that there is some form of a document or questions that are being presented to the subject that's going to tap into that individual's attitudes, beliefs, experiences, or behaviors. Now, you will find that the research team is trying to gather all of this information about this group of people. They're really believing that once they gather this information from this small pot of people, it will be very reflective of the larger group of people. What I'm referring to, they're thinking that the small group reflects the population of interests, thoughts, ideas, actions, and experiences. So let's talk about how one is typically chosen for research in respect to a survey. Now, when a team comes together to create a research, especially for surveys, they are looking at their target population, or what more specifically called their population of interest. Now, this is a term to really remember. Population of interest is the entire group of interest to researchers to which they wish to generalize their findings. So that is the area that is really significant. But it's difficult for you to just try to study everyone that's within that population of interest. I mean, you could never do that. So you dwindle down. You attempt to create a sample. So a sample is part of the population that is studied in order to reach conclusion about the entire population. So often we participate as a sample when individuals call you up to do a questionnaire over the phone, or if we're at some form of wonderful clothing store that's going to give us a little bit of 15 to 20% off if we fill out the form. But nevertheless, we are a part of that population that's actually being studied. Now, you'll find that researchers are constantly attempting to make sure that their sample closely resembles or reflects the larger group or the population of interest. So they want to include all the subgroups in the same proportion as found in the population of interest. So if you find that there's 20% Caucasian males that's in the population of interest, they're going to make sure, or they being the research team, will make sure that that 20% is represented in the sample. And you'll find the same, that if there's 20% of African American males that's in that population of interest, that research team is going to attempt to make sure that 20% of African American males are also in their sample. But that is a really good way to gain some form of information about how the population of interest is viewing a situation. So again, surveys. Now, you will find that presenting these surveys, again, they're going to be presented in an interview-like style sometimes. Other times it could be a questionnaire to where you have to fill out the form, or you have to go online and fill out the form. But plainly put, there are some advantages and disadvantages to this method. One, researchers have to be very careful about how they are wording the questions, and they have to be aware of the content. So sometimes people can be very wordy in their speech or in their writing, and it can confuse the reader. or the content could be very risque, and so an individual doesn't feel comfortable with sharing that particular part of their life. Another issue could be the interviewer characteristics. Sometimes people don't feel so close or comfortable with sharing with certain people because of a characteristic. You also have to be aware that a lot of people shows a lot of scrutiny with questionnaires, interviews, and surveys. So some people may question your research. You may also find that some of these questionnaires could be less expensive. If you're going to give a document to someone to just complete themselves, hey, that's little to no manpower that you'll have to expand. Some of the disadvantages: costly and time consuming. Sometimes you'll find that faulty information will be gathered because sometimes people just go through the information without really thinking about the questions. Social desirability response is really huge. People oftentimes will say things to please other people. And then sometimes people intentionally mislead others in their information. So there are so many drawbacks to this form of research. Now, we're moving to correlational methods. Now, it's really important for us to understand a correlational method and identify all of its limitations. So we understand that a correlational method examines relationships among variables. You will find that these variables can be positively correlated as one variable goes up and the other one goes up, or it could be negatively correlated as one variable goes up, the other one goes down, or not at all related. What's really important about this is to understand that correlational methods establishes substantial proof that there is a degree of relationship between characteristics, events, or behaviors. It's also important to understand that a lot of the research that we read that's from a correlational study may present a correlation coefficient. It's a numerical value that indicates strength and direction of the relationship between variables, which I alluded to earlier. Remember, with the correlation coefficient, it can range from a positive 1, which is perfect positive correlation, or to a negative 1, which is a perfect negative correlation. Again, when we think about a positive correlation, remember we're thinking about two variables going in the same direction. A good example of this could be when stress increases, illness usually increases. That's a positive correlation. On the other hand, we have what we call a negative correlation. When one value increases associated with a decrease in another. A good example of a negative correlation is the number of cigarettes smoked. As the number of cigarettes one smokes increases, the years of expected to live decreases. So we need to be aware of what is a positive correlation as well as a negative correlation.